Dr. Gemara, Omer Rava. Okay? Omer Rava, Hai Riata the Chakloi. This is Rashi says, it's the same as this is Chavetz K'deira. It's a different term for the porridge. Chavetz K'deira, which is a mixture of flour and sweetener. The mavshi be'kimcha, the sweeter iko. There's a flour is the main thing. That's this is more in case in point that over there in this place for Chakloi, a place where they're more they're in the village. Rashi explains they put more flour. In the city, it's more it's a little more made for taste. By the time we do shit, we put more honey. The same conclusion we said before. Kol sheish boy. Okay, Rabbi, so we're up to chavitza. Amr Yosef, big sugi. Chavitza. Chavitza is the idea, basically, we'll see in a minute, is where you're taking some bread and you're breaking into pieces, and it's going to affect the bracha. Now, according to Rashi, you're breaking into pieces and you're also cooking it, which maybe would be somewhat similar, if you want to take something that's similar in our world of food, is what we call French toast, is you're taking bread and you're more or less frying it, depends how much oil you have, but it's similar. We're going to see, but here, so what's going to be important is how big are the pieces. So, Amar Yosef Chavitza. These people learn kazayis. So, as long as it has a kazayis, even if you take it after, it's really a little more than French toast. You're actually cooking it in water. It's treated as bread. The less the people says, but if it's smaller pieces, less than kazayis, so Amar Rav Yosef, how do I know this? So that's an interesting, difficult ride. The Tanya. I made written a raya from a brisa in Menachos. Talk about the Menachos, a person brings some of the Menachos, you take them and you put them in a pot and you fry them. So you Menachos B'Shalayim, not on the Achel, so here it says you make Hamaitzi on the Menacha. Okay, that's what we expected. It's a new law now. It says Kulan Paitin Kazayis. So you see that it has to be a Kazayis. Rashi explained, so we see what do you see from here? Alma Ptitin Kazayis. So as long as you have a Kazayis, you do make a Maitzi, even though this is also just fried bread. Even though it's fried bread, it's fried dough. Still, if it has a Kazayis, you make a Maitzi. Okay? Interesting. Amalei Abaye, Amiata, the Tana de Beirat, the Tana de Beiri, Damar, the Tana de Shmal, the Amar, Porchat Shemachzir. Now, there's another shita that says that you should really not just make it in pieces. You make it. We said you make. In other words, the Torah says that you have to break the menachos. You have to break into pieces as part of the korban. But he says even more, not just pieces. So we said it's kazayas, but he says no. You have to make it to little tiny pieces. Actually, machzir the soilus. It's like flour. It's just fine pieces. As hachanami. So does that mean, according to what we're saying, that you, in that case, you wouldn't make a mitzvah lechem haaretz? Maybe I'll prove to you that's not true. Tanya, we learned as follows. And again, this raya really bringing a raya not from Menachos. This is a raya really in general. What happens when you have pieces of bread and are broken into little pieces, and you want to eat them. So how do we look at that bread? Loka bikulim kizayis, for ochla. So im chametzu on his kares, im matzu on the metzvu chavos apas. If you have little pieces, again, I think it is going on Rashis. It is going on the menachos, but so you take these little pieces. Now, halachically, how do I treat them? If it's chametz, it's kares. If it's matzah, you can be it's called bread. Even though it's little tiny pieces, it's still called bread. So that goes against what we said before. It's not just here you see it is bread, irrelevant how tiny the pieces are. So the more answers over my skin, which are also, if you take the bread, the pieces, and you knead them back together, so then it goes back to being bread. So it's not a raya against Rav Yosef. Yachi, well, 1 second. What about the sefer? For who shall offer the pras? If it doesn't, now the word it's the wording here that's bothering us. That's if he ate them. If our son, ate it. Right? It's not plural. It's achlan. That's the word achlan. That's throwing us off. That sounds like it's pieces. You want to suggest that the reason why it goes back to being bread because he reconstructed it to turn it to one big piece, right? That's a sort of, you said Rav Yosef, if it's kazayis, it's bread, not, it's less, it's not. So it sounds like it remains pieces, and yet it's a bread. If it's bread, it should be a moitzi also. So shachlobi boile. So the Gemara says, you're right. That's not the answer to the question. So why is it according to Yosef over here? How can you explain this, that it's treated as bread? So the answer is there's another factor involved. We're going to throw another factor in. And that is, since these pieces came from a big loaf of bread, which has a size obviously, and that loaf of bread is here, so it's the little pieces, in this case, Rabbi Yosef would agree, retain the status of bread. Because it can be lechem gadol. It's like ki'ilu I have a big piece of bread and I cut a piece and I take a bite. So what? Is all of a sudden that not bread? Can't be. So that's a different story. So but if you take bread and you take a whole loaf of bread and you break it to little pieces and you cook it, also according to Rashi, Rabbi Yosef says that's bread. That's not bread. But he said that, and we'll have to explain this price as Bami Lechem Gadol. Okay, now we're going to see Rav Sheshes disagrees with Rabbi Yosef, and he says, no, it's not true. Amud Rav Sheshes Kavitza Afagav. Those people in Gizayis. Although it's small in pieces, V'vorech alav hamoitzi. In fact, you make hamoitzi lechem ha'aretz. He only has one other condition. Amar Rava, very logical condition. Who the ikar aleh to listen the nama. It really depends on the texture. If the texture, atzule, atulisa, the texture is that a bread, irrelevant to how small it is, you make hamoitzi lechem ha'aretz. If cooking it to the point where maybe it loses its texture of bread, that's a different story. And I agree. So now we're going to go into other types of flour-water combinations, which maybe have questionable textures of bread, and therefore we are questioning whether or not they make a moitzi or mezainis or something. And it goes as follows: Chupni, chayav and challah. Now there's always two issues in challah. There's an issue of it: is it has a same challah, there's a same lechem, it's bread, and therefore you take challah from it. You make a moitzi, bench, and you take challah. So those are always the three. Now, so here the first question is challah. We declare to Lisa the Nama. Truknin Chayavim b'challah. I'm sorry. Truknin Chayavim b'challah. So now what's truknin? Guess what we're doing? Truknin tu b'challah. We'll see in a second. So there's an argument how we classify, how we categorize truknin. So what is truk mean? What does this word truk mean, Rabbi? What is that? All right, kuva da'ara. It means to say it's what's called the kuva da'ara. It's Rashi explains it's a space in the oven, in the ground of the oven. Meaning to say it's a liquid, very liquidy type of batter with flour and water, where you kind of just, and because it's liquidy, it just goes into like a hole and bakes. It's not like a loaf of bread. It just bakes in the oven. So therefore, it's a different texture. It's quite bread, and it doesn't have dough. So that's why it's controversial whether or not, once it's baked, it'll be called bread or not. Similarly, teresa p'tura min hachala. What is teresa? It's a batter that you kind of just like you pour it on the oven and it cooks. It's very hot and cooks. So again, it's like, but the point is, it's not a bread consistency. It's a batter. It's a gvil. It's just a mixture. It's just you didn't properly knead or mix the flour and the water, so it doesn't really create a dough, and therefore it's controversial whether or not, or therefore, Bai says it doesn't need challah. It's not dough. It's not really bread. Or it's like a pastry dough, more like it's a nama. It's a dough that you bake it on a piece of metal, and you add a lot of oil on it. It's like the way, maybe similar maybe to the way they make today Brachos. They take the dough, they put a lot of oil on it. So it's not really. It's a different consistency. It's not bread. It's like a barek. It's like a pastry dough. So that's why it's mezaitis. It's not. It's patur minachal. Tani abchia lachem asui lekutach patur minachal. Now, this is not. It's kutach is a food, is a dish, is a dairy dish, and it has little tiny pieces of bread in it. So the whole point of this bread is not to use it as bread, but to use it as like a filler in its kutach. So that's not really bread. Now, you also see in a minute, you don't bake it the same way either. It's just like you kind of want a different type of consistency. You want like a hard consistency to go into the kutach or something, whatever it is, a chewy thing, or I don't know. Yeah. So you don't bake it. You bake it in the sun as opposed to the oven. So if it's made for kutach, patur minachala. Well, it depends. What is kutach? If it's asan ke'evin, if it's made as a big sheet of bread, a sheet, of like a cookie, like a big long sheet. So it's chayot. I'm sorry. No, okay, sorry. Ke'evin, not sheet. Other way. I'm saying it wrong. Ke'evin is it's loaves. If you cut it up into nice loaves, and then you make loaves, so then it's really bread. You may be using it for whatever, using it afterwards, but essentially creating bread. Whereas if it's a sheet, wooden, it's just a long sheet that's not made as bread. It's made to use as, to commercialize it and use it in some other food. Only by the Yosef Haikuv the Arab. Now he goes back to go. I'm like, Misav's Namahu, Kuv the Balma, it's not bread. It's bread is you take flour and water and you knead it together and you create a dough and it has a consistency. This doesn't. This is gufla. Gufla is just a mixture. It's mixing flour and water without really mixing it properly. Now the difference is as follows though. Even though it's not really bread, but if you make it into bread by acting like it's bread, that means to say you'll use it as your main part of the meal, like bread. Then that's what he did. Do a little more. Omar Ravashi Adam Yoitze Ben Chodas and Pesach. Same thing. And it's also called bread. So therefore you can use it in Pesach. Assuming there's no chametz. It's my time with lechem oni curry bread. It's called lechem oni. Omar Mar Ravashi Haydufshu to Tamari Levarach and Lov Shachal. Okay, new topic. New topic of myself. If you take dates and you squeeze and squeeze until you have juice, what bracha? It's from the date. Date to eight. No, we say since you squeeze the juice out of the date, shachal levar. Why? We say, when it says that time is zeh ba'almahu. It's not dates. Juice out of the dates is what's called zeya ba'alma. It's just literally speaking, the sweat, but it just means it doesn't have the real status of the date itself. It's something, it's an extraction of the date, not the date. Come on, now we're going to bring a source for this. This source is in Hilchos Truma. And we say as follows, Tlash Tamarim v'yayin tapuchim. Again, same idea, you squeeze it, or apple juice, apple cider really. Choymetz, sifanios of vinegar, Sharmei perish or Truma. Okay, now this is Truma. So, do I treat this as mamish oichel Truma or not? Now, if I eat it, you have to pay back to Truma and you have to pay Chaimish. That's what Allah says. Rabbi Yud Poiter. He says, no, this is not called eating Truma, because this is not really Truma. This is it's an extract of the Truma, so it's not called eating Truma. You're not eating food of Truma, and therefore you're potter on the extra fine of Chaimish and Truma. What a trima? Now we're going to see trima we'll see in a minute. It's crushed fruits. Mal. I don't know what he meant. What do you mean trima? So my comment. Yosef Ravina comes. Do you mean crushed sesames, or or do you mean crushed some other fruit, karkum, some other herb, karkum commerce, or the porcelain commerce, or do you mean crushed grapes? Which kind of crushed fruit are you talking about? Ask you Rav the Daita. I'm like, chashilta v'ari commerce. No, I know now. I have what you mean. You mean chashilta, which is. It's a type also something crushed. What's a shelter? Okay, let's explain in a minute. Chashilta is what you mean. Remember how the Ravasi hides morning. The dates, shel truma, mutal suspend truma, lasa suspend shechar. I think it's the dates, crushed dates. You're allowed to make them. In other words, it's considered to be fruit still. So tomorrow we're doing trima and bracha, and that's why it doesn't take away its shame as a pre and it's eight, and it's not destroying ma'aser truma. My time, what's the reason? It's not like juice when you squeeze it out. You're crushing it, it's still the fruit itself. I'm going to do a little more. Shtita. Rav Moshe Binyomin Friedman. Shtita is you're mixing flour, you're taking grain, you're toasting it, you're grinding it up, you're making a certain type of consistency of the flour, and this mixes well into a drink, and then we make a drink out of this called shtita. So Rav Moshe Binyomin Friedman, but it's the end of the day, it's a drink. You make chocolate, it's warmer, maybe it's more explains. Depends how you make it. Haba ava, if it's thick, haba racha. Ava la achila. That ava is more like a porridge almost. It's like it's something to eat. Racha, and if we make racha the fruit craft. And if it's thin, it's liquidy. So then it's a drink, and you make shahakol. A drink, you make shahakol. Also, Rabbi Yosef, now here's a question. 1 second. This is halacha of Shabbos. You can prepare the shtus, which is to say that Shabbos is shayis and zayis. Now, this shasisa, you're preparing them Shabbos. That means you're allowed to drink it on Shabbos. He's not doing the food for Chavei, Rishul, food for Shabbos, Mishardi. How can you can't drink it on Shabbos. How can you prepare it on Shabbos? Is that not true? What do you mean? It's not the food for Shabbos, but it's food. You can eat. You know, apples are very healthy, but you're still allowed to eat them on Shabbos. The answer is no, because if I'm eating it and ultimately getting healed by it, that's okay. It's food. I'm eating food. So since here I'm also, that's why it's permissible in Shabbos. So it's not a stira. Yes, the thick shtita is for refuah, but you do eat it, and therefore it's permissible in Shabbos. And therefore, but it goes back, what we said at the beginning is still the same. If it's thick, it's Poseidon. If it's liquid, it's a chocolate. It's similar, very similar. It's nice when I'm gavla achila k'mechaved. He's mechavim l'achila, refuah memela kahaved. And refuah automatically comes. But he's the first lesson was gavra lachila k'mechaved. He's just eating it, right? And the second lesson is he's really eating it for refuah, but he's still eating it, and the refuah is automatic. It's not quite. It's not a difference. Now, one more step. I'm going to finish with Sicha, the Rav Shmuel Dimya. Now, why do we need this whole thing of Rav? Obviously, okay, if it's liquid, you make charcoal. If it's Zaynas, what do you have to make this point of Shtita? Why? What would you think? The answer is as follows. It's true. You're allowed to have it on Shabbos. That's in the case where you're really eating it. But if you're drinking it only to have refuah, let's say that's your intention. Right? You have a drink where you don't really want to eat it, but it's food. But I'll drink it, because I don't feel well. I'll drink some tea. I don't like tea, but I'm drinking it. So so maybe I would think lo nevarach on the cloud. It's dinner. I don't want to make a bracha on this. Mashla no. Whenever you enjoy something, also lahenas boilim hazeh li bracha, you always make a bracha. Okay.